The 12-gauge shotgun clicked ominously as Meridian Hawthorne cocked it, her eyes never leaving the massive silhouette filling her doorframe. At 6'6", Kestrel Bronson had to duck to fit through most doorways, but he stood perfectly. Still as the widow aimed the weapon at his chest, her 2 young children peering around her skirts like frightened rabbits. "You've got exactly 10 seconds to state your business before I put a hole in that fancy vest," Meridian said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. 3 months of living alone with her children in the rundown cabin had taught her that survival meant shooting first and asking questions later. Kestrel raised his massive hands slowly, his steel-blue eyes taking in the desperation behind her fierce facade, the patched dress that had seen better years, the children's hollow cheeks, the way she held herself like a cornered wildcat ready to strike. "Ma'am, I'm Kestrel Bronson from the Circleby Ranch. I came to make you a proposition. If you're here about the overdue rent, we don't have it." A tear-old dove whispered from behind her mother's worn skirts, her voice barely audible. Beside her 6-year-old Phoenix clutched a wooden horse so tightly his knuckles had gone. White Kestrel's heart clenched at the sight of those frightened faces. He'd ridden over here on a practical mission. His sprawling ranch needed a woman's management. And he'd heard the Hawthorne widow was desperate enough to consider any reasonable arrangement. What he hadn't expected was to feel like someone had kicked him in the chest the moment he saw her. Meridian. Hawthorne was beautiful in the way wildflowers were beautiful, untamed, resilient, growing strong despite harsh conditions. Her chestnut hair had escaped its pins, framing a face marked by grief, but not broken by it. She couldn't be more than 25. Yet she carried herself with the fierce protectiveness of a woman who'd learned to, young that the world showed no mercy to the vulnerable. "I'm not here about rent," Kestrel said carefully, keeping his voice low and non-threatening. "I'm here because my ranch needs a woman's touch, and your children need a father." The shotgun wavered slightly in her grip. "What exactly are you saying?" "Saying marry me, Meridian Hawthorne." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Behind her, both children gasped audibly, while Meridian's face went through a series of expressions: shock, suspicion, and something that might have been desperate hope before settling back into wariness. "You don't even know me," she said. Finally, "I know you've been widowed 8 months. I know you're 3 months behind on rent and your husband's debts are mounting. I know you worked as a seamstress before you married and that you can read and write better than half the men in this county." Kestrel's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were gentle. "I know you love those children more than your own life, and that you'd do anything to keep them safe and fed." Meridian's breath caught. He'd done his research clearly, but there was no mockery in his tone, only understanding. "And I know," he continued, "that you're probably wondering what kind of man proposes marriage to a woman he's never properly met." "The thought had crossed my mind," she admitted. The shotgun lowering slightly, Kestrel stepped closer, careful not to make any sudden movements, the kind who's been running a ranch alone for 5 years and realizes that some jobs require partnership. The kind who sees 2 children who deserve better than wondering where their next meal will come from. Phoenix peeked out further from behind his mother's skirts. "Are you really a giant?" he asked in the fearless way of 6-year-olds. Despite the tension, Kestrel found himself smiling. "Just tall son. Really tall." Dove tugged at Meridian's dress. "He seems nice." Meridian's eyes never left Kestrel's face. "What exactly would you expect from this ... arrangement?" "A partner," he said simply. "Someone to help run the household, manage the accounts, maybe teach reading to some of the ranch hands' children. In return, you and your children would have a home, security, and my protection." "And what about?" She gestured vaguely, color rising in her cheeks. "We'd be married in name and law," Kestrel said, understanding her meaning, "but anything beyond, that would be entirely your choice, if and when you were ready. No pressure, no expectations." The offer was more generous than anything she could have dreamed. Yet something in his eyes suggested this wasn't entirely business for him either. "I need time to think," she said finally, lowering the shotgun completely. "Take all the time you need." "But Meridian?" He touched the brim of his hat. "Don't wait. Too long. Winter's coming, and this cabin won't keep you warm through another Montana cold snap. As his boots echoed off the porch, Meridian sank into her rickety chair, her mind reeling. Marriage to a stranger, even one who seemed honorable, was terrifying. But watching her children's faces light up at the mention of security and warmth, she wondered if she could afford to refuse. 3 days of sleepless nights and empty cupboards made Meridian's decision for her. She bundled the children into their threadbare coats and made the long walk to the Circle B ranch, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. The sprawling property that came into view took her breath away. Endless pastures dotted, with cattle, a magnificent 2-storied ranch house with a wraparound porch, and outbuildings that spoke of prosperity and careful management. Kestrel emerged from the barn as they approached, wiping his hands on a leather apron. Without it, she could see the full breadths of his shoulders, the way his shirt stretched across a chest built by years of hard labor. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, covering the distance between them in long, measured strides. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Mama said. "We might get to live in a real house," Phoenix announced, bouncing on his toes. "With glass windows and everything." Dove, more reserved than her brother, stayed close to her mother's side, but studied Kestrel with intelligent eyes. "Do you really have books?" she asked shyly. Kestrel knelt down to the girl's level, bringing his intimidating height down to something less overwhelming. "I have a whole room full of books. Would you like to see?" The tour of the house left Meridian speechless. The kitchen was 3 times the size of her entire cabin, with a massive cast-iron stove and enough space to feed an army. The parlor boasted not only books, but also a piano, its mahogany surface gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Upstairs, he showed them to 2 connecting bedrooms that would be theirs, rooms with real beds, colorful quilts, and windows that looked out over the vast Montana landscape. "The master bedroom is downstairs," Kestrel explained quietly while the children explored their new quarters. "You'd have complete privacy up here." Meridian ran her fingers along the smooth wooden windowsill, trying to process the magnitude of what he was offering. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why me? Surely there are unmarried women in town who would jump at the chance to marry a prosperous rancher." Kestrel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains that ringed his property. "Because unmarried women want romance and promises I can't make. They want a husband who'll court them with flowers and poetry." "You want security for?" "Your children and a partner you can trust." "I can give you those things." There was something in his tone that made her study his profile more carefully. "What happened to make you so certain romance isn't possible?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let's just say I learned the hard way that love and marriage don't always go hand in hand. This arrangement is honest. We both know exactly what we're getting." Before she could probe deeper, Phoenix came barreling into the room. "Mama, there's a rocking horse in the other room." "A real one." Mr. Bronson Dove appeared in the doorway. More cautious than her brother, there are ladies' clothes in the wardrobe. "Pretty ones." Kestrel cleared his throat, looking almost embarrassed. "I took the liberty of ordering some things from the catalog. I estimated sizes based on, well, I hope they fit." Meridian opened the wardrobe to find 3 beautiful dresses, in different styles and colors, along with undergarments, shoes, and even a warm winter coat. The care and thoughtfulness behind the gesture nearly brought tears to her eyes. "You did all this before you knew if I'd accept?" "I was hopeful," he said simply. That evening, after sharing the finest meal she'd eaten in months, Meridian found herself on the front porch with Kestrel, while the children played with their new toys in the parlor. Sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, and for the first time in months, she felt something approaching peace. "If I agree to this," she said carefully, "what would the ceremony be like?" "Simple, just us, the children, and Reverend Morrison. We could do it tomorrow, if you're ready." "Tomorrow?" The word sent a thrill of terror and excitement through her. "And your ranch hands? They won't object to suddenly having a woman and children around?" Kestrel's smile was genuine for the first time since she'd met him. "Meridian, half my crew are family men themselves. They've been telling me for years that this place, needs a woman's touch. Cookie's getting too old to manage meals for 30 men, and everyone's tired of mending their own clothes. 30 men? Her voice came out slightly strangled. Don't worry. Most of them live in the bunkhouse or have cabins with their families scattered around the property. The main house would be just us, and them. He nodded toward the window where Phoenix and Dove were building an elaborate castle out of books. Comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the children's laughter and the distant lowing of cattle. Meridian found herself studying Kestrel's profile in the fading light, the strong jaw. The way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he watched the children play. The careful way he held himself as if conscious of his size and its potential to intimidate. Kestrel, she said finally, I accept your proposal. He turned to look at her fully, and for just a moment, his carefully controlled expression slipped, revealing something that looked remarkably like relief mixed with genuine happiness. Thank you, he said quietly. I promise you won't regret it. As they shook hands to seal their agreement, Meridian wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the smartest decision she'd ever made. The wedding took place the next afternoon in the small church that served the scattered ranching community. Meridian wore the blue dress Kestrel had chosen for her. A perfect fit that made her feel beautiful for the first time since her husband's death. Phoenix fidgeted in his new suit while Dove clutched a bouquet of wildflowers that Cookie, the ancient ranch cook, had picked that morning. Reverend Morrison, a weathered man who'd seen every kind of union the frontier had to offer, kept the ceremony brief and practical. Do you, Kestrel Bronson, take Meridian to be your lawfully wedded wife, to protect and provide for her and her children, as long as you both shall live? I do. Kestrel's deep voice carried clearly through the small church. And do you, Meridian? Hawthorne, take Kestrel to be your lawfully wedded husband, to stand by him and support him as long as you both shall live. Meridian looked up into steel blue eyes that held warmth and sincerity, and felt some of her terror ease. I do. The ring Kestrel slipped onto her finger was simple gold, but it fit perfectly. Another detail he'd somehow managed to get right. When Reverend Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Kestrel's kiss was gentle and brief. More like sealing a contract than beginning a romance. The handful of ranch hands who'd attended whooped and cheered. And Cookie surprised everyone by producing a cake he'd somehow managed to bake without anyone noticing. The celebration was modest but warm, and Meridian found herself genuinely smiling for the first time in months. The real adjustment began that evening. After putting the children to bed in their new rooms, Meridian found herself alone with Kestrel. In the parlor, both of them suddenly awkward as the reality of their situation settled in. I usually read for an hour or so before bed, Kestrel said, settling into a large armchair with a leather-bound book. You're welcome to join me, or if you prefer. I'd like that, Meridian said quickly, relieved that he wasn't expecting them to immediately play the role of devoted couple. She selected a volume of poetry from his extensive collection and curled up in the chair across from him. The quiet companionship was surprisingly comfortable. Occasionally, one of them would share an interesting passage or amusing observation. But mostly they simply enjoyed the peaceful silence, broken only by the crackling fire and the distant sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Their first real test came 3 days later, when a delegation of neighboring ranchers arrived unexpectedly for a business meeting. Meridian heard the horses approaching and quickly smoothed her hair, knowing this would be her introduction to the community as Kestrel's wife, Bronson. Boomed a red-faced man as he dismounted. Heard you went and got yourself married without inviting any of us to celebrate. Kestrel emerged from the barn, his expression carefully neutral. Hal Drummond, meet my wife, Meridian. The scrutiny was immediate and intense. Meridian felt the weight of multiple gazes evaluating everything, from her dress to her posture to the way she stood beside her new husband. These men would judge not only her worthiness as Kestrel's wife, but also her ability to be an asset to his business dealings. Ma'am Drummond touched his hat with grudging respect. Mighty pleased to meet you. Heard you got young ones? 2 children, Meridian replied, keeping her voice steady. They're inside having their lessons. Lessons? Another rancher, this one younger with calculating eyes, stepped forward. You teaching them yourself? I am. I was a school teacher before my first marriage. She sensed this was some kind of test and met it head on. I'd be happy to teach any of the ranch children as well if their parents are interested. The men exchanged glances, and she could see the approval in their faces. An educated woman who could teach was an asset any ranch community would value. The business meeting that followed revealed another side of her new husband. In the comfort of his own home, discussing cattle prices and grazing rights, Kestrel commanded, respect effortlessly. His voice carried authority, his knowledge was encyclopedic, and his judgment was clearly trusted by men who'd known him for years. Meridian served coffee and cake, playing the perfect hostess while listening carefully too. Every word. The ranch was even more prosperous than she'd realized, and Kestrel's reputation extended far beyond their immediate area. After the men left, Kestrel found her in the kitchen washing the coffee cups. You handled that perfectly, he said, rolling up his sleeves to help dry the dishes. Hal Drummond's wife is the biggest gossip in 3 counties. By tomorrow, everyone will know that Kestrel Bronson married a lady with brains and manners. Is that important to you? What people think? Was quiet for a moment, considering. In this business, reputation is everything. A man's word is his bond, and that extends to his family. If people respect you, they respect me. It makes every deal easier. Meridian nodded, understanding the practical implications. Then I'll do my best not to embarrass you. Meridian turned to face her fully, his expression serious. You could never embarrass me. What you did today, the way you handled yourself, the grace and intelligence you showed. I'm proud to call you my wife. The sincerity in his voice made something warm unfurl in her chest. This might have started as a practical arrangement, but she was beginning to glimpse the man beneath the controlled exterior. And what she saw intrigued her more than she'd expected. That night, as she prepared for bed in her private room, Meridian caught herself wondering what it would be like to truly be Kestrel's wife in every sense of the word. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. But for the first time since accepting his proposal, she allowed herself to consider that their marriage might become something more than just a convenient arrangement. The first crisis came. 6 weeks into their marriage, arriving in the form of an elegant woman in an expensive traveling dress, who stepped down from the afternoon stage with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. Meridian was hanging laundry when she noticed the stranger approaching. The house, her silk parasol twirling as she walked with purposeful strides. Excuse me, the woman called out in a cultured voice that carried just a hint of Eastern sophistication. I'm looking for Kestrel Bronson. He's in the north pasture. With the men, Meridian replied, wiping her hands on her apron. I'm his wife. Can I help you with something? The woman's perfectly composed expression cracked for just a moment, revealing something that looked like shock mixed with fury. His wife. She looked Meridian up and down with barely concealed disdain. How? ... Interesting. I'm Viviana Ashford. Kestrel and I were close friends in Denver. The name hit Meridian like a physical blow. She'd heard it whispered among the ranch hands, Viviana Ashford, the socialite who'd broken Kestrel's heart 3 years ago when she'd married a wealthy banker instead of accepting his proposal. The woman who'd taught him that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. I see, Meridian said carefully, her instincts telling her this visit was anything but coincidental. My husband recently passed, Viviana continued, her voice taking on a tragic note that somehow managed to sound theatrical. I've been thinking so much about the past, about choices made and opportunities missed. When I heard Kestrel had married, I simply had to come and offer my congratulations. Meridian doubted congratulations were anywhere on this woman's agenda, but she maintained her composure. Would you like to come in for tea while we wait for Kestrel to return? The parlor had never felt smaller than it did with Viviana Ashford examining every detail with calculating eyes. She moved through the room like she owned it, touching books, running her fingers along the piano keys, clearly evaluating the changes Meridian had brought to what had once been a bachelor's domain. You've made some interesting choices in decoration, Viviana observed, her tone making it clear she found them lacking. Very rustic. I find comfort in simplicity, Meridian replied, pouring tea with steady hands despite the tension crackling. In the air? Oh yes, I can see the appeal for someone of your background. Viviana's smile was sharp as cut glass. Tell me, however, did you manage to catch Kestrel's attention? He was always so particular about the company he kept. Before Meridian could formulate a response that wouldn't start an all-out war, the front door opened and Kestrel's voice carried through the house. Meridian? I saw a strange horse out front. He appeared in the parlor doorway and stopped dead, his face going through a series of expressions: surprise, wariness, and something that might have been old pain before settling into careful neutrality. Viviana, this is ... unexpected. Kestrel Viviana rose gracefully, every movement calculated to remind him of her beauty and sophistication. You look wonderful. Ranch life clearly agrees with you. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Meridian watched her husband's face, seeing the way his jaw tightened, the way he seemed to grow even larger and more imposing in response to Viviana's presence. I'm sorry for your loss, he said formally. Your husband was a good man. He was. Viviana agreed, stepping closer to Kestrel with the confidence of someone who'd once had the right to do so. But he wasn't you, darling. He could never make me feel the way you did. Meridian felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was exactly what she'd feared, that someone from Kestrel's past would appear and remind him that their practical arrangement was a poor substitute for real love. Viviana, Kestrel's voice carried a warning. I think you should. I made such a terrible mistake, Kestrel Viviana interrupted, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. I chose security over love, money over passion. But I'm free now, and I've come to ask if you can forgive me. We can start again. The silence that followed felt eternal. Meridian found herself holding her breath, waiting for Kestrel's response while Viviana watched him with desperate hope in her carefully made-up eyes. Finally, Kestrel spoke, his voice quiet but firm. No, no. Viviana's composure slipped completely. But surely you can't prefer this arrangement to what we had. This arrangement, Kestrel said, moving to stand beside Meridian's chair, is my marriage to a woman I respect and trust. A woman who chose to build something with me rather than destroy it for personal gain. But you loved me. Viviana's voice rose to near hysteria. You said you'd love me forever. I did love you, Kestrel admitted, his hand coming to rest gently on Meridian's shoulder. My God. And you taught me that love without trust, without partnership, without respect, is just pretty words that mean nothing when tested. Viviana stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. You can't mean that. This woman, these children, they're not your real family. I could give you so much more. They're my real family, Kestrel said firmly. And they've given me something you never could. Peace. The word hung in the air like a benediction. Viviana looked between Kestrel and Meridian, finally seeming to understand that she'd lost this battle before it had even begun. I see, she said, her voice cold as winter ice. I hope you'll be very happy with your practical arrangement. She left in a flurry of silk and wounded pride. Meridian and Kestrel stood in the parlor, the silence stretching between them. I'm sorry you had to witness that, Kestrel said finally. Are you? Meridian asked quietly. Sorry it happened. Or, sorry I was here to see it. He turned to look at her fully, his steel blue eyes intense with emotion. I'm sorry she hurt you with her words. And I'm grateful you were here to remind me what really matters. The warmth in his voice made her heart skip a beat, and for the first time, Meridian began to believe that their practical arrangement might be growing into something neither of them had dared to hope for. The change between them was subtle, but undeniable. After Viviana's visit, Kestrel began seeking out Meridian's company in ways that went beyond mere politeness. He asked her opinion on ranch business, shared stories of his childhood over dinner, and often joined her on the porch in the evenings. When the children were asleep, "Tell me about your first husband," he said one night as they watched the stars emerge over the Montana landscape. Meridian was quiet for so long he wondered if she'd heard him. Finally she spoke. Jonas was a good man, kind, gentle, predictable. We married young because it was expected, and we were content together. Not passionate, not earth-shaking, just comfortable. Do you miss that? The comfort of familiarity. She considered the question carefully. I thought I did. But living here with you, I've realized there's something more valuable than comfort. There's partnership. Jonas made decisions for me, thinking he was protecting me. You ask my opinion, and trust me to be capable. The conversation was interrupted by Phoenix calling out from his bedroom window. Mama, I had a bad dream. Meridian started to rise, but Kestrel was already on his feet. I'll go, he said gently. Wait, you finish your tea? She watched through the window as he climbed the stairs, massive frame somehow managing to move quietly through the house. Over the past weeks, she'd observed his interactions with her children with growing wonder. Phoenix, who'd been wary of all men since his father's death, now followed Kestrel around the ranch like a devoted puppy. And Dove, always serious beyond. Her years had begun showing him her drawings and asking his opinion on everything from book choices to the proper way to braid her hair. When Kestrel returned 20 minutes later, he was carrying a sleepy Dove in his arms. She heard us talking and wanted to say goodnight again, he explained, settling the little girl on Meridian's lap. Mama, Dove whispered, are you going to have a baby? Meridian felt her cheeks flame. What makes you ask that, sweetheart? Mrs. Henderson at the store said married people have babies. And Phoenix wants a little brother to teach things too. Kestrel cleared his throat. That's something for your mama to decide when she's ready. But you'd be a good papa, Dove. Continued with the brutal honesty of childhood. You're already good with us, and Phoenix thinks you're the strongest man in the whole world. After tucking Dove back into bed, Meridian found herself alone with Kestrel again. Both of them acutely aware of the conversation they'd just had. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Children sometimes say things ... Don't apologize. His voice was rough with emotion. In 3 months, those children have given me more joy than I'd had in years. If you ever wanted, he trailed off, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd known him. If I ever wanted what a child, with me, I'd be honored. Simple. The statement hit her like lightning. Not a demand, not an expectation, just an offer wrapped in vulnerability that took her breath away. Kestrel, she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the feelings that had been growing inside her. Their moment was shattered by the sound of horses approaching fast, followed by urgent shouting. Buck Martinez, one of the senior ranch hands, burst through the front door without ceremony. Boss, we got trouble. Big trouble. They followed Buck outside to find half a dozen riders in the moonlight, their faces grim with exhaustion and worry. Rustlers hit the Morrison place, Buck explained breathlessly. Took near 200 head and burned out the family. Morrisons. In town with the doctor, but his youngest boy didn't make it out of the house in time? Meridian felt the blood drain from her face. The Morrison ranch was only 15 miles away, and they had children the same ages as Phoenix and Dove. Get the men together, Kestrel ordered, his voice taking on the authority she'd heard in business meetings. We ride at first light. What? About the family? Meridian asked. Mrs. Morrison and the other children. They're staying with Reverend Patterson for now, but... Buck looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, they lost everything. Clothes, food, even the baby's medicine. Without hesitation, Meridian turned toward the house. Dove outgrew her winter coat. Phoenix has extra shirts. I'll gather what I can. For the next hour, she worked systematically through their belongings, setting aside anything that could help the Morrison family. Kestrel found her in the kitchen, packing food into baskets. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, I do. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with determination. This is what neighbors do for each other, what family does. The word family hung between them, loaded with meaning. Weren't just talking about the Morrisons anymore. Meridian, Kestrel said, stepping closer. When I come back from tracking these rustlers, ... When you come back, she interrupted, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. We'll talk about everything. About children and the future and whatever this is growing between us. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. "And if I don't come back, you will," she said with fierce certainty. "Because you have a family waiting for you now. A real family, and we need you." The kiss that followed was nothing like their polite wedding peck. It was desperate and hungry and full of all the words they hadn't yet found the courage to say. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Meridian saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. Love, hope, and the terrifying vulnerability that came with caring deeply about someone else's happiness. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "And I love you," he replied, the words carrying the weight of a man who'd never expected to feel this way again. "All of you, the children, this life we're building, everything." As dawn broke over the mountains, Meridian stood on the porch, watching Kestrel ride away with his men, her heart full of equal parts love and terror. For the first time, she had everything to lose. 3 days of waiting stretched Meridian's nerves to the breaking point. She threw herself into caring for the Morrison family, who had been brought to the Circle B ranch when it became clear their recovery would take weeks rather than days. Mrs. Morrison, a woman near Meridian's age, had lost her youngest son and was barely holding herself together for her remaining children. "I keep thinking I hear little Timothy calling for me," she whispered to Meridian as they prepared supper for the expanded household. "How do you bear it? The not knowing if they're safe?" Meridian's hands stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. "You bear it because the alternative is falling apart, and falling apart doesn't bring them home." But privately, she was fighting the same battle. Every hour that passed without word from Kestrel and his men felt like an eternity. Phoenix had grown quiet and withdrawn, while Dove kept asking when Papa Kestrel would come home. Even Cookie, usually the most optimistic soul on the ranch, wore his worry like a heavy coat. On the fourth morning, Meridian was hanging laundry when she spotted a lone rider approaching from the north. Her heart leaped until she realized it wasn't Kestrel, but Tommy Martinez, Buck's 16-year-old son, riding hellbent for leather. "Mrs. Bronson," he shouted as he dismounted. They found the rustlers, but there was a fight. "The boss is hurt bad, ma'am, real bad." The world tilted sideways. Meridian gripped a clothesline to keep from falling, her vision going gray at the edges. "How bad?" she managed to ask. "Took a bullet in the chest. Doc Patterson's with him now, but ... Tommy's young face crumpled. "Ma'am, you need to come. He's been asking for you." The ride to the rustlers' camp took 2 hours across rough terrain, with Meridian pushing her horse harder than she ever had before. When they finally arrived at the makeshift medical station, she could see the gravity of the situation in every face that turned toward her. Dr. Patterson, a gruff man in his 60s, looked up from where he knelt beside a still figure on a makeshift stretcher. "Meridian, thank God you're here." Kestrel lay unconscious, his massive frame somehow diminished by pain and blood loss. A rough bandage covered his chest, already soaked through with crimson. His face was pale as winter snow, and his breathing was shallow and labored. "Talk to him," Dr. Patterson said quietly. "I've done what I can here, but we need to get him back to town. He's been calling your name." Meridian knelt beside the stretcher, taking Kestrel's cold hand in both of hers. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but seeking. "Meridian? Yes, it's me. You're going to be fine. The doctor's taking good care of you. The children." His voice was barely audible. "They're safe. They're waiting for you to come home." She leaned closer, willing her strength into him. "Phoenix wants to show you how he's been practicing with the rope you gave him." And Dove finished that story she's been writing. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Love you," he breathed. "I love you too. So much it terrifies me." She pressed her lips to his forehead. "So you have to fight, Kestrel. You have to come back." To us, the journey back to town was a nightmare of jolting wagon wheels and whispered prayers. Meridian rode alongside the wagon, never taking her eyes off Kestrel's face, talking to him constantly, even when he couldn't respond. She told him about the ranch, about plans for expanding the house, about the future they were going to build. Together at the doctor's office, she was banished to the waiting room while Dr. Patterson and his assistant worked to remove the bullet and repair the damage. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Buck and the other ranch hands sat with her, their faces carved from stone, while Phoenix and Dove huddled close to her sides. "Is Papa Kestrel going to die like Papa Jonas did?" Dove asked in a small voice that nearly shattered Meridian's composure. "Entirely." "No," Meridian said fiercely, pulling both children closer. "He's the strongest man we know, remember? He's going to fight his way back to us." When Dr. Patterson finally emerged, his face was grave but not hopeless. "The bullet's out, and I've repaired what damage I could. Next 24 hours will tell us everything. If he makes it through the night without infection setting in, ... Can I see him?" "Briefly. It's unconscious. But sometimes they can hear us even when they can't respond." Kestrel looked even smaller in the narrow hospital bed, his powerful frame reduced to something fragile and vulnerable. Meridian took his hand and settled into the chair beside him, determined not to move until he opened his eyes again. "You listen to me, Kestrel Bronson," she whispered fiercely. "We made promises to each other. You promised to protect and provide for us, and I promised to stand by you. I'm keeping my promise, so you'd better keep yours." She talked through the night, sharing memories, dreams, even reading aloud from the book of poetry she'd brought from home. As dawn broke through the small window, she felt the first flutter of movement in his fingers. "Kestrel." She leaned forward, hope flaring in her chest. His eyes opened slowly, clearer than they'd been since the shooting. "You single? Quotes? Where else would I be?" She brought his hand to her lips, tears streaming down her face. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere. The rustlers caught. Buck says, you got the leader before you went down. They'll face justice." He struggled to sit up, wincing at the movement. "The ranch, ... the children, ... all fine. Everyone's fine. The Morrison family is staying with us until they can rebuild. Cookie's been managing the men and actually cooking better meals than usual because he's trying to impress Mrs. Morrison." She smiled through her tears. "The only thing that wasn't fine was me, thinking I might lose you before we'd had a chance to really begin." Kestrel reached up with his free hand to touch her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I heard you. In the darkness, I heard your voice calling me back. Then you know how much I need you, how much we all need you. I know something else, too," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I know that what we have isn't just practical anymore. I know that I love you more than I ever thought possible, and I know that I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." The kiss they shared was gentle, but full of promise. Witnessed by the morning sun streaming through the window and the distant sounds of a town waking up to a new day. 6 months later, Meridian stood in the kitchen of their expanded ranch house, one hand resting on her growing belly, while the other stirred a pot of stew. That would feed the 24 people expected for dinner. The Circle B had become the social center of their ranching community. Partly because of Kestrel's leadership, and partly because Meridian had discovered she had a gift for bringing people together. "Mama," Phoenix burst through the door, his face bright with excitement. "The new foals are walking. Papa Kestrel says I can name the little brown one." At 10 years old now, Phoenix had grown tall and confident under Kestrel's patient guidance. He could rope almost as well as some of the younger ranch hands and had declared his intention to be a rancher just like his stepfather. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Did you finish your arithmetic?" "Yes, ma'am. Dove helped me with the hard problems." Phoenix grinned. "She's smarter than anybody, even smarter than Teacher Morrison." Dove, now 12, and increasingly beautiful with her mother's features and her own quiet intelligence, had indeed surpassed what the local schoolteacher could offer. Kestrel had arranged for her to correspond with a teacher in Denver who sent advanced lessons by mail. And there was already talk of sending her to the territorial capital for higher education when she came of age. "Where's your sister now?" Meridian asked, adding seasoning to the stew. "In the library with Papa Kestrel. They're reading some book about ancient Rome. It sounds boring, but Dove loves it." Meridian smiled, thinking of her husband and daughter bent over their books together. Kestrel had proven to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, treating Phoenix and Dove as if they were his own blood. And in 3 months, he would have a biological child to love as well, a fact that filled him with a wonder that was beautiful to witness. The sound of horses approaching drew her attention to the window. A familiar wagon was pulling up to the house, and her heart lifted as she recognized the Morrison family returning from their trip to Denver. The Morrisons had rebuilt their ranch, with help from Kestrel and the other neighbors, but more than that, they'd rebuilt their lives. Mrs. Morrison Celeste had become Meridian's closest friend, and her remaining children had integrated seamlessly into the extended family that the Circle B had become. "Meridian," Celeste called out as she climbed down from the wagon. "Wait until you see what we brought back from the city." The afternoon was spent unpacking gifts and sharing news from Denver. Celeste had gone to settle some legal matters related to her late husband's estate, but she'd also used the opportunity to purchase supplies for the school she and Meridian were establishing for the ranch children. "The territorial governor himself asked about you," Celeste told Kestrel as they gathered for dinner. "Apparently word of your success here has reached the capital. There's talk of appointing you to some kind of commission for livestock management." Kestrel looked surprised but pleased. "I'd consider it as long as it didn't require leaving the ranch for long periods." "Nothing could make him leave us," Meridian said, reaching for his hand across the table. "We learned that lesson the hard way." Ksht. The scar on Kestrel's chest had healed completely, leaving only a thin white line as evidence of how close they'd come to losing everything. But the experience had changed them both, stripping away the last pretenses of their practical arrangement and revealing the deep, abiding love that had grown between them. After dinner, as had become their custom, the extended family gathered on the large front porch. Cookie played his fiddle while some of the ranch hands sang. Children ran around catching fireflies. Couples sat close together, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant colors. Meridian found herself pulled against Kestrel's side as they sat on the porch swing he'd built for her, their unborn child moving restlessly between them. "Any regrets?" He asked the same question he'd posed on their wedding night, but with an entirely different meaning now. "Only that we wasted so much time pretending this was just a business arrangement," she replied, tilting her face up to his. I should have told you I was falling in love with you that first week. Would you have believed me if I'd said the same?" She considered this. "Probably not. I think we both needed time to trust that what we were feeling was real." "It's real," he said, his hand covering hers on her belly. "This is real. Our family, our life together, the way you make me want to be a better man every single day. You were already a good man, Kestrel Bronson. You just needed someone to remind you." As if summoned by their voices, Phoenix and Dove appeared at their sides, Phoenix climbing onto the swing despite being nearly too big for it, while Dove settled on the porch steps nearby. "Tell us the story again," Phoenix demanded. "About how you proposed to Mama?" "Again?" Kestrel laughed. "I told you that story 100 times. But it's a good story," Dove said seriously. "It's romantic." "Romantic?" Meridian raised an eyebrow. "Your stepfather basically interviewed me for a job." "But he fell in love with you at first sight," Phoenix insisted. "He told me so. He said the minute he saw you with that shotgun, he knew you were the bravest, most beautiful woman in Montana." Kestrel's cheeks actually reddened slightly. "I may have said something like that." "And Mama fell in love with you because you were kind to us," Dove added. "And because you had books, because you made her feel safe. Is that true?" Kestrel asked, looking down at his wife with tender amusement. "All true," Meridian confirmed. "Though I should mention that your impressive size and those steel blue eyes didn't hurt your cause either." Their laughter was interrupted by a sharp kick from the baby, strong enough to make Meridian gasp. "He's going to be as big as Papa Kestrel," Phoenix declared confidently. "Well, she is going to be as strong-willed as her mother," Dove countered. "Either way," Kestrel said, his hand moving protectively over Meridian's belly, "this child is going to be loved beyond measure." As the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Meridian reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd walked down a dusty road 8 months ago, desperate and alone, carrying nothing but hope and determination. Now she sat surrounded by love, part of a family that extended far beyond blood relations to include everyone who'd found a home at the Circle B ranch. "My ranch needs a woman's touch. Your children need a father," she quoted softly, remembering Kestrel's proposal. And he prompted, knowing there was more. He all needed each other, she finished. We just didn't know it yet. Best business proposition I ever made, Kestrel said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Best decision I ever made was saying yes, Meridian replied, settling more comfortably against his warmth as their children chattered happily around them, and their friends filled the evening air with music and laughter. In the distance, the cattle lowed softly in the pastures, and somewhere a night bird called to its mate. The Circle B Ranch stretched out before them in the moonlight. Acres of prosperity and peace, built on the foundation of two hearts brave enough to risk love again, and in 3 months, when their son was born, strong and healthy with his father's steel blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, he would be welcomed into a family that proved every day that the best things in life came not from careful planning, but from having the courage to say yes when love knocked on your door.